Hey, how's everyone doing tonight? Welcome back to the Nerds MC podcast. Joining me again is Cody Moss.
Hey, so today's topics are going to be very interesting. Can't wait to get to them.
And by that he means we are discussing PC building and the intricacies of it, and OS selections coming off the back of building your PC. So, Cody, you have had the unique experience of building something as of today. So, why don't you go ahead and kick us off on this journey?
So, what's funny is it actually started yesterday. Sometimes PC planning had, PC building, if you come at it with a plan and if you verify everything to the nth degree, you're probably going to have a good time. I thought I did, but my old computer decided, okay, so for a few weeks now, actually a couple months, I've been planning on changing certain parts of my computer. It started out where I was just going to build a new computer, but then I decided, well, my computer's still doing all right. I have a decent enough graphics card, and I just need to get it because the whole problem with my old one was it was so loud because the bearings in the front fans were starting to go out, and the liquid cooler was starting to make gurgly, bubbly noises. That's what kind of rushed this. Was the fact is my AIO started making noises.
Airflow chads rise up.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, so it's got to go before it decides to burst or something silly. I actually think it's getting low on liquid because, AIOs, they do evaporate over time. But yeah, so what happened was I had my wife, because Prime Day just came up, and I had decided that we were just going to buy a new case. So I got a Corsair 4000D. It's a really nice case, a lot of airflow. And we were also going to replace the cooler with a Be Quiet Dark Rock 5. And I was like, okay, yeah, so we're just going to take the old motherboard, the old memory, and basically the whole computer out of the one case, put it in the new case, and change out the cooler. That way I didn't actually have to replace much. It would just be those. But that's where things kind of went wrong. Parts show up yesterday, got excited, decided to go build this thing. Well, turns out when I built my wife's computer that then I took over after we decided that my previous computer was just going to end up being a server. I took over her computer. It became mine. When I had built it, apparently I cross-threaded two of the standoffs.
Oh, Cody.
And I didn't know this until I went to go and undo them because I had already taken out the power supply, had already unwired it, took out the graphics card, took off the cooler, wiped it all down, got rid of the dust. Super excited. Go to undo the motherboard. Undo most of the screws. They come off fine. I undo two of them, and then it all gives away, and I'm like, okay, cool. So the screws for some reason aren't coming off. They're probably just stuck in the PCB or whatever. I pull this thing out, and then that's when I see that the standoffs are still on the back of the motherboard. I hadn't unscrewed the screw. I had unscrewed the standoff that was stuck on the screw because I had cross-threaded the standoffs. So I'm going through my options. I'm like, well, do I Dremel it off? Problem is then there's metal shavings. It'll probably get all up. I'll probably end up shorting the board anyway when I go to turn it on. And then that's when it dawned on me that also my brand new case has a USB Type-C port. Well, my old motherboard doesn't have a USB Type-C socket, for the cable. So at this point, I'm like, I'm either going to have to Dremel these things off and live with a dead Type-C port, or I'm just going to go buy another motherboard. Jump on Best Buy's app, found a motherboard that I thought was compatible. It was a B550 MSI Tomahawk. It comes with Wi-Fi 6E, and I was like, it's not bad for like $113. Sure, why not? Purchase it, go for pickup, pick it up, and then this is where the problem comes. This is why you should always double check everything that's going to go into your motherboard before purchasing your motherboard. Because I thought I bought a motherboard that was compatible because I saw that it had an AM4 socket. I have an AM4 Ryzen 5 2600. I thought it would work. Fun fact.
Did not work.
The B550 chipset does not support the Ryzen fucking 2000 series. It's 3000 to 5000. And I'm like, bruh. So at that point, it's already past like Best Buy's closing time. I'm checking Walmart. I'm checking Target. Because, by the way, they do actually now sell computer parts in store. I was actually kind of shocked by that when we were walking through the electric section in both those stores and saw computer parts. So I checked them for pickup. They didn't have it. Best Buy already closed at this time. Had a pickup for tomorrow. Ryzen 9 5900X. And I'd heard good things about that CPU. And also, they were $550 when they first came out. They're now $230, I think is what I paid. I'll have to verify that. But yeah, it was like $200-something. And this is where I'm like, or do I just return the motherboard and try to go on like Amazon and find another one that would work with my chip? I said, fuck it. And bought the 5900X. Picked it up this morning. Started building the computer again. Had to pause this afternoon because I had some errands I had to run. But then I finally got the computer built, all put together, and I dropped it. I didn't actually drop it. It's gently put down. But I put it down on my desk, wired it all up, turned it on, saw the BIOS boot, and saw all my hardware in the BIOS, and then went, you know what? It's almost time to record the podcast. So now here we are. I've downloaded an operating system, which luckily we're going to be going over OS selection, and I also already burned it to my USB flash drive. So as soon as we're off of here, I'm going to be installing onto this new computer, and hopefully gaming before 1 a.m.
That's not going to happen. We both build enough computers that I think at this point we can all agree the argument of upgradability is a complete fallacy. Like, you always end up scrapping everything and you end up rebuilding the whole goddamn thing every time you do anything to a computer. And it sounds like you stuck by that rule, my friend. You for sure embodied that principle of PC building. So, good on you.
Hey.
Sounds like you got a really good computer out of it.
It wasn't everything. I kept my DDR4 memory. Yes, I know DDR5 is way faster. People in the comments. I also kept my power supply, and I kept my SSDs and my graphics card. Okay. So it was only the motherboard and only the processor, and then its cooler and its processor. Yeah, who the fuck am I kidding? It was basically everything.
You will replace the rest of those parts. We know this. Because you're going to sit there. What's your graphics card?
3060 RTX.
Yeah, you're going to get a 4060 or like a 4090. And then you'll have replaced that. And then you're going to be like, well, this PCI lane doesn't fully support the cards. And I've got to go upgrade everything again.
Yeah.
but all that is to say, good on you, man. You get to go have some fun after the podcast and see what's going on.
Yeah.
So I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of hinted at some of this, during the story. What's your CPU brand of choice, and will we agree or disagree?
These days, I'm sorry, but Ryzen's just doing too much cool shit. Like, it's just. Especially with their X3D chips, I actually almost did decide to wait for Amazon to get like a Ryzen 7 5650 X3D, because like I really want one of those X3D chips. But if getting it today and also a more powerful chip, I was like, yeah, I guess I will go with the Ryzen 9 5900X. Wow, I sound like first world problems, right?
Yeah.
And I gotta say, it's just like they're doing too much cool shit. Intel, I feel like, is falling behind, and they are becoming a bit of the underdog because, like, the i9s, from what I've been hearing, like the 13th and 14th gen, not doing hot. Like, there's some crashing issues they're investigating. And, like, I used to be an Intel fanboy. You can vouch for this because, like, I remember working with you back, when we first met. And I was harping on Intel being like the best gaming chip. And
I just want to point something out.
Mm-hmm.
You knew me 12 years ago, not quite that long, but a long time. I have been AMD ride or die since the Athlon days. So, like, I'm glad
back
you
when
saw
you
the
could,
light.
like,
I'm glad
heat
you
your
gave
house.
Intel the bird, and I'm glad you came on over.
I remember the AMD Athlons because there's so many memes on the internet about, like, you can tell where the AMD user is, and it's like their roof is the one with the missing snow.
Oh man, I think I had a Phenom. Phenom was it back in the day. I had a Phenom, and then I got a next generation Athlon Tri-Core, which there's a very good reason no one makes 3-core CPUs anymore. That was an awful chip, but I loved it, and it did good for me.
I don't know, 3 cores just sounds like such a weird way of handling it.
It was.
Like, especially because, like, some of the algorithms that would split up your work, man, like, I can imagine some of them not being able to chunk properly because of that.
It did not. It did not go well.
Oh, okay.
It's funny because, like, extra core, extra 2 threads, so 6 threads, and then you're coming from a dual core and you're expecting like massive like throughput increase. I think I actually lost performance, but I had 3 cores and I thought I was cool.
Most of my childhood, we only had like 3 computers most of my childhood because, one, computers are expensive, but also 2, my parents didn't really see why we would upgrade computers, besides my brother and I being like, but we want to play like the newest games and they need this thing. But it was like Intel Pentium. I don't remember all of the numbers off of the 3, but I remember all 3 of them were Intel Pentium. Actually, no, that's not true, because it was the last one that was the family computer that eventually became my computer through a hand-me-down process. It had an Intel Core 2 Duo.
Nice. Those were good chips.
Yeah. And, like, it was the Pentiums, if I recall correctly, they were single-core, decent clock, but for the time, not today's standards.
I mean, back in the day, and this is again me trying to remember because this was legitimately like, dear God, this has been 24 years now, 20 years now. Used to be AMD was going the multi-core route for parallelization. Intel thought, fuck it, we'll just go max clock speed and ship the largest fan shroud heatsink assembly we can. So that way, this Pentium's clocked at like 5 gigahertz, and we really, it's going to generate a lot of heat, but we just said screw it, and we're going to exhaust all of it. Obviously, AMD is doing to Intel then what they are doing now, and that led into the Core 2 Duo series and Intel's multi-core chips with all of the Lake series that basically, created the I series, and then from there created the Intel we know today. So, like, that is another thing to keep in mind. We will probably see a shift in another 5-10 years, but AMD's on top right now, baby. Yeah.
I am for whatever gives me more FPS on my video games.
Yeah.
Like I've even explained, like I was like full on Intel fanboy until people started showing stats where AMD chips are outperforming, Intel chips, given the same graphics card, right? Because the graphics card does most of the lifting, unless it's like a CPU bound game. But I mean, still, your CPU, your GPU have to work together to produce an entire game experience. So I'm always for whatever gives me that better experience.
Yeah. I mean, kind of leaning on that though, I'm interested in getting your thoughts about this next section, but like, I've got a Ryzen 5 3600. It's 12 threads, 6 cores, does literally everything I could ever need it to do. And like you said, you had a 2600. So like, are things even CPU bound nowadays? I think no.
It really depends on the game. Like, I know like RTS games, they tend to be, because there's a lot of calculations that need to happen. Like the GPU is also good at math, but certain things that like need calculating, the CPU does better. And so like developers will, make it more towards the CPU. And then, if like the CPU is your bottleneck, well, you're still waiting for it.
Yeah.
Also, the CPU, like, so the GPU will render the graphics, but it still is up to, like, if I remember correctly, bear with me, I am not a hardware guru. I don't do very much with hardware, so I could be completely wrong about this. But it's, even once, like, a scene is rendered by the graphics card, it has to go to the CPU to then be, like, processed out to, like, maybe like physics and stuff like that, and then it goes out to your screen.
Yeah. I think it depends on how your stack works. I know back in the day whenever there were like hybrid chips, if you remember like APUs, more or less the CPU acted as a computational muxer. So you would like have your image processed through both basically. And you're right, like you couldn't get an image out without the CPU being involved in some way, shape, or form. I don't know about standalone graphics cards. I feel like, because like the GPU is basically directly hooked into what you're looking at.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it requires back channeling.
Well, I just know that like AMD. Oh no, it's not back channeling. Oh right. No, I'm completely wrong. Because thinking about it, the AMD, they have like their Ryzen X3D chips, and it has like a 3D cache. And so like the way it works is as it goes to storage to pull out assets, that goes through the CPU, right? And then after that, it will cache it either in memory or your L3 cache if you were lucky, but in this case, AMD now has those X3D chips, so it will actually cache those in the X3D, the 3D cache. It stores the assets there. And then from there, when the GPU goes, hey, I need assets, well, it's up to the CPU to get it those assets.
You're right. You're 100% right.
So, like, again, like, your GPU, if your CPU is bottlenecking it, well, it's bottlenecking it, right? You're going to have to get a more powerful thing. But it's interesting that you touched on APUs, because like APUs are kind of making a comeback now, because I'm not sure if you've noticed, but there is a slew of handheld PC like game devices to call out the Ally ROG or ROG Ally from Asus and the Steam Deck from Valve.
I don't like that. That was a dark time.
Well, but they're better now, because like that's one of the games that's one of the ways I primarily game now is on my Steam Deck. I've been playing Days Gone, which is a PlayStation X exclusive because now it's on PC, and part of that is I could just play it on my Steam Deck, which is playing it at high settings. I'm getting 60 frames per second, and it just works.
Fair enough. I mean, you're not wrong. Like, so I have a bad taste in my mouth from APUs because of how things used to be back in like the bulldozer days and the Threadripper days. Those were like awful, just genuinely bad processors. And back then, AMD like really quadrupled down in the early to mid 2010s on APUs for everything. And what it was is they were basically selling these chips to Microsoft and PlayStation. I think they made the chips for the PS4, and then they were like flipping them onto the consumer PC market because they didn't have the money to invest in research and R&D basically to produce a consumer grade chip that was worth a damn. Obviously, Ryzen came out, that kind of changed. They had a couple of things in the pipe that they more or less saw to fruition from the money they got from building the game consoles. And then from there, kind of catapulted themselves back into relevancy for the consumer enthusiast market. But as someone who's been primarily an AMD user for literally at this point, like 20 plus years, that was a really rough time. And so whenever I see APU, it kind of, I was like, oh God, not again. But yeah, I guess like all that is to say, you're right in that things are better now than they were, and those hybrid chips are probably in a much better state.
Yeah, I mean, you are right about AMD being the primary distributor of chips for PlayStation and Xbox, but I believe that is still true today. Now, I haven't seen like a
Yeah.
teardown of an Xbox One or an Xbox Series, but if I recall correctly, they are AMD based as well. So like the APUs are also still making their way into the specialized console experience.
Yeah, they're just not trying to flip them on the consumer market like they were.
Yeah,
That's the difference.
now they make consumer grade ones that aren't the same, and
Yeah.
it's I forget like it's part of like the Zen architecture is like the driving force behind this.
Yep.
But
I find it fascinating what AMD's doing in server CPUs as well. Have you seen their new x86 TDPs and the power consumption?
yes and no. Like I haven't looked too closely at them, but I do like I in the past I've worked with AWS, and AWS now has like where you could be like M6 or M6A for the AMD, and
Yeah.
just adding that one character can sometimes save you a boatload of money, probably due to the less power consumption.
Well, and they crunch numbers really hard. So I'm not sure if you've seen like AWS Gravitron and them rolling out those ARM-based processors. They're basically doing what Apple did with Apple Silicon, to where like they're building out bespoke CPU solutions on the ARM instruction set. But AMD is essentially at this point taking the x86 instruction set, making it similar thermal profiled, and keeping x86's strong suit, which is just raw number crunching. So for the most part, they're keeping it relevant, which is fascinating to see because like Intel invented the x86 instruction set. So now to see AMD be the one to kind of pioneer it into the future in a world where ARM and all these other alternative architectures are coming into play is fascinating.
Yeah. Though I feel like a lot of this is also kind of a reaction to not necessarily like I'm not saying like the Ryzen series because clearly AMD just wanted to make a better x86 processor or well AMD 64 processor, but like a lot of this move into ARM I think was triggered mostly by Apple, like because the Pi had been around for like ever, and like there was like a bunch of like SBCs that were all ARM based. Believe me, I'm a huge fan of them. I have like a million Raspberry Pis around my house doing various things, but it still is one of those things that it wasn't taking off anywhere fast. And then you have Apple out of the blue with their M chips Like, we're recording now, and I'm doing it off of an M2 MacBook Air, and the M chips, like, I haven't seen ARM move as fast as it has until those were announced, and I've been using them for almost 10 years.
Well, I think it kind of changed the perception of what an ARM CPU could realistically be. I don't know about you, but for me, when I thought ARM, I thought lower power consumption, low power. So Raspberry Pis were the main like server application of them I'd seen, because you had a bunch of people like us like take what are supposed to be learning PC kits and then cluster them to run home labs, and then they became not cheap, which made that not tenable. But and then you saw them in cell phones, which were at the time lower level, lower power workloads. At this point, cell phones have kind of bridged the gap of performance, and you can realistically do, and admittedly this is in short bursts because there's no active cooling, desktop type workloads on these small devices. It's not sustainable because, again, of the active cooling, but just to kind of, throw something out there, Resident Evil is playable on the iPhone, same as it is on the PS4 and 5. That's because of ARM bridging the performance gap. And you've seen this in Android as well with the new Snapdragon chips. I'm not sure if you saw, but Snapdragon released a series of new laptops with Microsoft and Windows. And the performance, mind you, this is not a vertically integrated machine, but you essentially have first gen M1 performance now in the Windows space, which is very good. And in some workloads, it actually beat the Mac chip. But what this kind of means, or what it's signaling to me, is a shift away from traditional x86 processors for consumer grade hardware. And I could see that shifting into more of a enthusiast hobbyist role, basically, where they become more exclusively for gamers and to a lesser extent creatives. Because I think Apple's going to realistically end up pioneering ARM-based CPUs into the creative workflows. So again, like you and I work as software engineers, we work on ARM chips now because Mac uses ARM. A lot of the graphic designers I know, they're using ARM chips now. That's going to lead to a lot of that software pivoting to that architecture as its primary driver. And I think you'll see x86 fall off. Caveat to that, you don't see any games really on Macs because of the way that software works with Metal and the deprecation of OpenGL and things like that, and the non-adoption of Vulkan. I think x86 as an architecture is going to pivot to being more of an enthusiast type thing. What's your thoughts?
Well, I don't know if x86 is going to fall off into being an enthusiast thing. I think eventually everyone's going to be on ARM because Apple Rosetta has kind of shown that we can shim it and get actually decent performance out of these things. Like I use x86 images all the time, or packages all the time on my MacBook for work because of the fact that, just sometimes there is no ARM-based version of it. And, yes, I do have to run it through Rosetta, but it doesn't feel like it's not a native application. And I would be shocked if Windows doesn't do the same thing. Now, in the Linux space, this is where it could get a little rough because, we tend to do lag behind because, a lot of this open source stuff, unless it has like a business backing it takes a while. But I
don't know if that's true, though. Just to push back real quick, I think seeing server adoption like Gravitron, and then to your point, the Raspberry Pis, all those run Linux. Mm-hmm. Android is Linux running on ARM chips. I don't think we'll see... Like, Linux has been running on ARM now longer than probably any other desktop OS.
Yeah. That, and also, like, with cloud gaming coming up the way it's coming up and, like, the way it's kind of, like, starting to get traction, I can almost guarantee those servers are probably running Linux. And in turn... Yeah. Eventually, they may end up trying to push ARM because, companies like to save money. And like you said, the Gravitron CPUs are they are really the cheapest option on Amazon.
Yep.
And so because of that, we might see that where games do support ARM. And we might backport certain games because now companies seem a lot more interested in bringing games to the newer generation, so we will probably see where not every game, but, probably a good chunk of our games will be playable on ARM in the future.
Interesting. I find it like it's like as time progresses and I see more and more come into technology, processors continue to become, I'm going to use like, more relevantly irrelevant than they ever have been before. Because I think at this point you can get fairly any modern processor and do pretty much any computer task on it, regardless of what it is. Like my wife does everything on a Surface with an i3, and she does video editing, recording, drawing, graphic design, and it's just a bone stock Surface 7 Plus with an i3 and 8 gigs of RAM. She does it all on it, and it's like, if what is realistically probably the weakest modern chip handles all these workloads, does it really matter? I don't know.
No, because a lot of like the things you just said, it's sometimes you're not even touching the processor when you're doing these things. Like if I remember correctly, Intel, all of their i series have H.264 as a hardware section of it. So when you're encoding something to H.264, such as video or audio, it's, well, I think it's mostly all of the audio goes into that, but it's like there's like a hardware piece on the die that handles it outside of the core.
Interesting.
So it's like we're also building like pieces of technology that go alongside the cores to serve a certain purpose, especially like when
you have ASICs.
Mm-hmm. Like the NPUs that are coming out, like the neural processing units. Apple just announced them. I forget which iPhones they're going to be in, or if they're already in some of them. But soon there's going to be an update, and all of a sudden your phone is going to be able to run, AI models on it directly, locally.
Yeah.
Because it has a chip for it. And, I just think that like part of that is how like your wife is getting away with doing so much with that chip is because she may not even be touching the cores, which would be the weakest part.
It's interesting, like how, like the dynamics of building a computer have changed over the years, man. It's fascinating to me how like certain parts became so important and certain parts didn't. Used to be, I remember this vividly. You would buy, like a good CPU, a good GPU, and they'd share the load. And it's like weird how, depending upon what you're doing, that's changed.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking of GPUs, so like we beat the bricks off of CPUs at this point. Like we talked about a lot of it. What's your take on graphic processors?
I think as much as an NVIDIA fanboy I am, because believe me, I am huge into NVIDIA, but again, it's all about that FPS, and like they're doing really cool things with like DLSS, DLAA, and like other various technologies that they have surrounding their chips. But I also feel like in the next few years, we're going to start seeing NVIDIA fall behind like Intel is and start getting the underdog treatment, because AMD, they're doing some really spooky things. Like not even so much in the CPU market, going back to like the Steam Deck or the ROG Ally with their APUs, like, there's people who are playing games solely on these devices that don't even have a PC in their house. They bought the Steam Deck thinking it's going to open a world for them, and it probably has. And like as you're going through it, you're also seeing consoles have AMD chips. And so where's Nvidia in all of this? And I think that's where we're going to start seeing that Nvidia is going to start trying to get competitive in like the small device space, like handhelds or something. Actually, I think there's like rumors going around that like the Switch 2 is probably going to be using an Nvidia an Nvidia Tegra X1 chip or something like that. And I'm like, that would be huge if Nvidia gets that. But it's also that's one device.
Isn't the Switch using a Tegra 3 right now? Isn't the Switch using a Tegra 3 right now? Or am I misremembering?
I could be wrong. Or, correction, I guess I wouldn't be wrong because I never said anything about Switch 1. I am not a Switch enthusiast enough to know. I have 2 Switches in my house. They play Mario Kart. That's about it. So, I mean, they probably do have a Tegra chip.
I don't know why I could have sworn. Yeah, I'm looking. I'm curious now. I apologize. I'm sorry. Sorry for derailing.
Oh, no, it's fine. You know, this is like part of the talk of GPUs because, you know, APUs kind of get tied into that. But GPU-wise, I feel like NVIDIA is also fine because if you see it, like cloud gaming space, they have the enterprise market. I haven't really heard much about AMD having an enterprise graphics card, kind of like the Quadros or any of those other ones that NVIDIA has. But also, like, this AI thing has really bumped NVIDIA up, and that's also got me a little worried. Does the AI make it more sense for them to focus on that instead of gaming? Am I about to lose my favorite chip?
I think to a certain degree you've seen that already with NVIDIA. Like, they've primarily prioritized doing AI workloads, crypto workloads. I think CUDA cores are primarily around, like, creative pursuits, not so much gaming. I think ray tracing with the RTX series cards has been very interesting to see them do, but again, a lot of that is to kind of power AI to a degree and speculative shadow rendering. And to your point, like DLSS and upscaling, that's all AI technology with multiple applications. Like the gaming benefits are secondary to what they're able to do with frame generation and resolution generation.
Ooh, the fact is we are talking about DLSS. That does have me kind of wanting to like get... Not the 40 series. I think I'm going to skip that generation because we're just coming in so late. I might get a 5060, like when those come out.
Okay.
Because the thing is right now on my 3060, I get DLSS up to 2, but I can't play DLSS 3. Because DLSS 3 was locked to the 40 series and higher. So if I want that DLSS 3, I'm going to have to do that. But that's one of the cool things that AMD is pulling off right now and why a lot of these handheld gaming machines work and get the frame rates they do is they have FSR, which is, I forget what that stands for. But it still does the same thing, but except for theirs is software based, so basically any graphics card can use it. They just get away with like AMD using it a lot, and their APUs use it just fine. So like my Steam Deck, it was like Spider-Man remastered. I was getting like 30, 40 frames per second, which is feasible, perfectly acceptable. But then if I turned on FSR, all of a sudden I'm playing at 60.
Yep. Sure,
it could look a little muddy. And FSR is not nearly as polished as DLSS, but, the gameplay is smooth.
It is good enough for government work, as the saying goes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating seeing, like, the difference in usage between us. So, like, for me, I've got a 7600, an RX 7600 in my desktop. Mm-hmm. Does everything I need it to. And it's fine for me. But here's the caveat. I don't do ray tracing. I don't do upscaling. I play at 2.5K native, and that's it.
My problem has always been that I am also a monitor fanatic.
Yeah, you've got like a wraparound thing that looks like it's eating you.
Oh yeah, I have a Odyssey G9, not the OLED one. It was before that, which kind of makes me a little jealous that the OLED one was on sale for what I paid for mine. Ah. um, During Prime Day, I was looking, but I always have had like this. I always wanted like the newest, latest, and greatest monitor, even though like graphics cards would struggle with it, or games would struggle with it.
Oh, yeah.
Like I remember, I was the first one out of all my friends in college to have a 4K monitor. All the rest of them were 1080p. Like, this was even before graphics cards were advertising that they could push 1440p. And I was like, fuck it, I want this 4K Samsung display. Bought it, was trying to play with it. I ended up having to, like, set my resolution to 1080p most of the time anyway.
Yep.
At least for the first few years. And then after that, that's when I started getting like, usable frame rates. Because like this was when I was running SLI 66 or 660 Ti's. And then eventually I was running a 960 because I skipped, actually I think NVIDIA might have skipped 7 and 8. I can't recall. But yeah, it was like a 960 I remember having, and then I skipped the 1060 and the 1660, and then I had a 2060. But then during COVID, when GPUs were getting hard to find, I was like, shit, I might not ever be able to upgrade again. But luckily, we had a coworker who he just wanted Best Buy points. So he was using his like Best Buy credit card to buy like a bunch of PS5s and graphics cards as soon as they'd come on sale. One, so he could also pull them out of scalpers' hands too. And he would just show you the receipt and be like, pay that amount.
All right.
That was his whole thing, was you pay what he paid because he got to keep the Best Buy points for his credit card. That was all he cared about.
Hey, man, that works.
Mm-hmm. And he churned through them, and because of that, he was advertising the 3060, and I was like, sure, I bought it. And it's been sitting in my computer for like the last 4 years.
There you go.
Because that was also around...
I will say, I was going to say, when did graphic card naming get so damn weird? I remember, like, back in the day, if you wanted a NVIDIA, it was a 9600 GT or, like, a 9800 GT. And AMD was like, oh god, I think they were like the 6600 HD or some shit. So it's like, it's weird to see like how all these numbers, one, they've overlapped. Like a 6600, well, there's the Radeon 6600 HD, and then there's the 6600 XT. It's like, you guys you can't do that. Choose different numbers, choose a scheme, and stick with it. Shit makes no sense.
Yeah. I don't know what's happening. This is like happening in the tech industry in general. Have you seen monitor names?
Oh, God.
Like the monitor I'm on right now is an LG Ultra Gear. Like it has like a bunch of numbers and shit at the end. Because they have LG Ultra Gear as like their brand. And then it's like some gobbledygook number that just means that it's this generation or that generation with an OLED panel or a TCP panel. And dude, it's ridiculous. I wish we could go back to like, or actually, I guess it's not back because like technically names have kind of always sucked. It really depended on the product.
Been a mess.
But you remember like when Android had like the names like ice cream sandwich?
Yes.
And stuff like that, or Kit Kat, like
it was fun.
And it was also easy to know like which Android it was I was talking about. Like, hey, is this phone got the latest kit? Like, is it Kit Kat or is it ice cream sandwich? Right? Like, I didn't have to question it. Now every time I see the Android version number, I'm like, what does that mean?
What are they up to now?
I don't know. I have an iPhone.
All right, fair. Well, yeah, me too. Which is like hilarious because back in the day, I think you and I were both like massive Android people.
Yeah, but then we started making Apple money.
No, I just got old and wanted something that worked.
You could afford something that just worked.
Fair.
I will say, like, it was one of those things. I was so against Apple, like, my entire teenagehood. I was like, fuck Apple. Who needs it? It's a piece of garbage. And then, like, in my early 20s, I was the same way. And then it was like, I want to say like 2 or 3 years ago, I was looking at the hardware and I was like, yeah, like that price is all right. And then that's when I realized, I was like, oh shit, my opinion changed because I can now afford it.
I have always consistently said for what you get, it's really not worth it, man. Like, I mean, logically speaking, I can do all of the work on my laptop for work I do today on a machine from 2012. And I know this because I do it. But there is really something to be said for a vertically integrated, completely top to bottom experience curated by a company that does software and hardware really well. And Apple does, for better or for worse. And I think to a degree, you're right. It's like at some point it's no longer about the value of the hardware. It's about the value of your time when you use this hardware. And that begins to it bleeds into what you're spending your money on.
I will say, Apple, like the hardware game is very weak. Except for like their M chips, like those are pretty baller. But the part where I feel like Apple wins is the software. Like it's not necessarily the operating system because like there's some gotchas and some quirks, but it's the fact is that if I'm wearing my watch and it's logged in, if I open up my MacBook, it just unlocks.
Yeah.
Or I could touch like the fingerprint sensor and it just unlocks. Or
it's the vertical integration.
Or if I'm doing something on my phone, I can go click a little icon on my MacBook and it opens the same web page right there. Like it's the seamless connectivity between all the devices. That's what brought me to Apple. And it's, that's why like I was like telling my wife, like, you probably should just stay on Android. One, because it's what you know. Two, I also don't want to buy 2 iPhones. But 3 is you don't need that connectivity. Your phone is your life. Like she does everything on her phone. So it's, it makes more sense to me because I am like one of the, I guess as we keep calling them, the creatives. And I will switch from my phone to my MacBook quite a bit. Or sometimes I'll be like on my MacBook and my phone like has like the same functionality where if I'm on a web page, I can tell it, hey, just open the web page on my phone too.
Yep.
That's where Apple thrives, is that connectivity. And I have trouble seeing Android ever get to that, except for maybe Samsung. Like if Samsung like came out with a laptop, I imagine they would get it as smooth as a connectivity as Apple does. But, again, they own the phone, they own the watch, and at that point they would also own the computer to then be able to have that meshing done with like some kind of Samsung app that's across all of it, right? That knows how to communicate.
Yeah. Well, you're not wrong. Had nothing to do with GPU brands. We really got sidetracked.
Well, what's funny is it kind of also segues into our last topic, which is OS selection. And why did you pick it?
Yes. So, I think coming out of the conversations around PC building and how this kind of, works and, cobbling everything together, the thing that really does control how you interact with it, software. So I'm curious, what's your take on OS selection? What do you choose? Why do you choose it? Again, got my own opinions, but want to hear yours first.
So I'm not sure if OS selection is like a great one for me because I kind of have like the inability to select an operating system because I have an iPhone, that's iOS. I have a MacBook, that's macOS. I have an Android tablet, that's Android. On my desktop, there's now going to be Ubuntu. You and I talked about it, and originally it was running Arch for a bit, and then I got tired of it, installed Windows, and then now I'm getting tired of it again, so I'm just going to go try Ubuntu for a bit. So I distro hop on that one.
Copilot's a thing.
Yeah. Well, I actually kind of like Copilot. We should save that for another episode because I'm a pretty big fan of AI, but it sounds like you and I might have differing opinions, so we can use that for an episode.
Sounds good.
But then on top of it, I have an ROG Ally. That runs Windows 11, and that will always run Windows because it came built that way, and I'm using it as an appliance. It is there to play games. That's it. I use it mostly for Game Pass games. I have another laptop that has a 2060 in it. Technically, I would still use that sometimes, but right now with the puppy around, it's kind of hard because he chews everything. I don't want him chewing the power cable because zap. Also, I would like to be able to continue charging my laptop, but mostly the zapping is why I don't know. But then I also have a Steam Deck, which is Linux based in itself. So, I mean, like, I have every operating system besides Temple OS in my house.
I think if you wanted to, you could bootstrap the Lord's operating system, and you've chosen to be a heathen, and that's okay. I'm a heathen. You got to be a little darkened down sometimes. I get it.
I'm sorry, but all I can think of is like Richard Stallman's face, like
Ignatius.
Like as you're calling me a heathen, like not necessarily. Like I also see like the guy's face who like made Temple OS. I forget his name, but like some reason like when you say heathen, I can only think of Richard Stallman as like that Jesus like picture of him and kind of him looking down on me, and it's like, yeah, fuck you, I don't care.
I mean, we're not going to talk about the demon that is RMS right now.
Yeah, no.
What I will say is ancillary to you. I've pretty much standardized my whole household on Ubuntu at this point. Laptop, desktop, my son's laptop, my wife's computer, whenever we build her one, is going to run it. But there are some other considerations there around, like, drawing software.
I foresee you failing that migration.
I don't know, man. I can get her a Cintiq and libwacom native to Linux. Just runs.
Okay. Maybe I might be wrong. Maybe I'll be eating my words. Keep us updated.
Trust me, whenever my wife is either happy or yelling at me, I am positive we will hear about it. But all that is to say is, like, I have pretty much standardized at this point on FOSS just because I like owning my hardware. And I think the thing that for me sealed the deal was Proton. Like, unironically, that software has been amazing for me kind of being facilitated to use whatever operating system I want. Because, like, you and I, very similar, got started with Linux back in like 2008, 2009. It was not there. I don't know about your experience, but like for me, 2008, nothing worked consistently. And it was because of the hardware I had, but it just didn't support it. 2009, it kind of worked, but it was like very unpolished. And I think, again, you and I were talking earlier, but like 2010, 2011 was when it began to hit a level to where it worked on everything all right, and it was polished and usable. And that's kind of, when I stuck.
I stuck earlier, than that. I remember running Linux like 2006, 2007. Actually, I think it was even before that, but I
God.
barely remember it. So like when it worked for me, yeah, the UI was a little rough. I'm not gonna lie, but it's what we had. It's what we installed,
Yeah.
and like I didn't know better at the time. Like I was like 8 or 9.
Yeah, I mean, Windows 7 was brand new, just to preface this for people. Like, this is a long time ago
Oh,
now. Like, we were coming from, like, Windows. I had 98 at one point, and then XP. So, like, compared to that, Linux looked all right. You hit Windows 7, and I feel like that's when graphical fidelity in your OS kind of became important.
yeah. Um, Windows Vista, it was kind of there. Like they were trying to add like the
Yeah.
jelly buttons. Man, that just saying that takes me
Jelly
back to like
buttons.
Web 2.0 standard days. Oh,
Yes.
but I actually realized I misspoke earlier because I was like 8 or 9. Like that's when I remember like first getting a hold of Linux. But like 2006, 7, I was actually in my teenage years. Like that was like 13, 14. But
Okay.
around that time, like I was a console gamer. Like it was my PlayStation or my Xbox. Like that's what I played. So my
Yeah.
operating system being not able to play games was not a detriment to me. Mostly because like if I did play computer games, they were emulators, and emulators were. I recall back then were
They run
playing.
on everything.
Yeah, they were running just fine. A lot of them made it so that you could just download it. You would put it in a location and run the binary.
Yeah. So, having said all this, I'm curious. You mentioned you're putting Ubuntu on your brand new PC build. What's your plans? What are you going to be doing with it?
It's gonna be doing what it's been doing. Because it's I have my MacBook that this is what I do all my development work on, and like anytime I'm playing with like AIs and stuff like that. So this new computer that has just been built is pretty much purposely built to become my gaming computer that's going to drive my Odyssey G9 display. That's about it.
Ah,
It's gonna play games with Proton.
okay. I am curious to see how it goes because you play way more stuff than I do now. And like a lot of the stuff I play is all native. The big thing that I play that isn't is Fantasy Star. And to a lesser degree, I've played like Cyberpunk a bit, but for the most part, it's been Fantasy Star. So, someone like you who plays a lot of modern stuff, I'm curious to see how it goes. I mean, you have some experience with it because you've got a Steam Deck, and you mentioned yourself a lot of your gaming at this point is done on the deck. So, you've got like a good picture of what's going to run and what's not. I'm curious to see if that holds as you like bring in more powerful hardware.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where it's like the Steam Deck has been great because it has opened my eyes and shown me that Linux can be a path forward, especially with Proton, because it's such a game changer. It lets you play basically any game that's Windows based on Linux. Now, the one downside is not every game supports controller, so the Steam Deck's a little out there. If it is like a mouse only game, you could still get away with it with the Steam Deck 'cause it has like a trackpad and like you could just click the buttons
Yeah.
to do the mouse bits. But like anything that has to like you have to like emulate the controls onto the keyboard and whatnot, you can get it working, but it's gonna be it's not gonna be a great experience. But that's one of the things that's kind of cool about this build is since it is going to be Ubuntu, it's going to also run Proton. But behind it, I have a 3060 graphics card behind it.
Yeah.
And like I remember Starfield when it came out, I was one of the people. I did try to put it on my deck. Like that was like one of the very first things I did. Is I installed the 120 gig monstrosity and tried to boot it and got like single frames per second. It's just really not powerful enough. But it did run. I did see it do like its shader compilation and get to the menu.
Okay.
So, and like I was in the game. It's just the graphics card just couldn't push the frames. And I'm like, so with the GPU being here, it's probably going to make it so like things that I can't even play on my Steam Deck just due to performance issues, I'm going to be able to play here. Now, not everything works in Proton. And some companies are even being sticklers about it. And I'm going to call one out. Bungie, get your head out your ass. Because like I want to play Destiny 2 on my Steam Deck. I know it would work because there's people that have done it, but they have threatened that if they ever find out that you're ever playing through Proton, they're going to just ban your ass.
Why?
Because like apparently their anti-cheat doesn't work right in it or something like that. But I'm like, there's other anti-cheats out there, like easy anti-cheat. It's a checkbox to say to support Proton.
I mean,
so maybe we move to easy
Welbia
anti-cheat.
works. Welbia works, and that's a kernel level.
Yeah, but still, Bungie have threatened to, ban people if they find you playing on Proton. And so I'm like, this is going to kill my Destiny addiction. Actually, I've kind of already killed it because I don't play Destiny really much anymore. I didn't even buy the latest expansion, which kind of made me a little sad because like my friends were talking about it and we're talking about like the cool ending, and I'm like, oh, well.
I missed out.
Yeah, but then I also realized that's how they get their hooks in you because there's FOMO, and I'm like, I'm not gonna miss out. I'm gonna go play other games. There's more games in this world than just Destiny.
This is true.
But if they ever get their head out of their ass, I will download this shit on Linux so fast and just be like, no life in Destiny for the rest of my days.
That's fine. So, I am curious. So, like, you're a NVIDIA guy. You got a NVIDIA card. Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts on NVIDIA exposing their, what's the word? Not the code that runs on the cards, the firmware, but the public APIs for actually interfacing with that firmware. Like, was that a deciding factor in you giving Linux a try with a NVIDIA GPU?
No. Because, like I said, I have run Arch Linux on computers before to like play games. The only reason I liked Arch is because I could keep my drivers even bleeding edge. Though there's a reason they call it bleeding edge. You will bleed. But, it's one of those things, like, I've just always ran NVIDIA, even in Linux. Like, yes, it was always a pain in the butt because you had to make sure you ran the proprietary driver. But I'm not like a FOSS Zoe. Like, it's, oh, no, I have to run a binary blob. The only part that really annoyed me about the experience is the fact is that, like, it couldn't just come bundled with the installer. It's one of those things you have to install it yourself.
The thing that got me back in the day that kind of pushed me towards AMD GPUs even more, just because, again, I've run Linux nearly as long as you have, was I remember back in the day to get NVIDIA GPUs working, you would have to install the new kernel version, drop to an ncurses interface, install the kernel modules via a proprietary script that NVIDIA maintained, to then have the kernel boot into your GPU. Like, did you ever mess with those old school NVIDIA script ncurses installers, or not really?
A little bit, because like I said, I've been running NVIDIA a while now. Except for the thing is, it has gotten better. Like, I had forgotten about like the having to drop the ncurses. Like, I just remember the last time I did it, I had to go to their website, download the driver, which came with the shell script, and no, because this wasn't Arch Linux. This was, which distro was this? Because I was distro hopping at the time. I think it was Fedora. Yeah, it was Fedora at the time. This was back in like 2015, 2016. And
Oh,
I
damn.
just had to download the driver, came with the shell script, go into like that directory and just say sudo run script.
Yeah.
And after that, it would execute that. It would do a bunch of stuff, and then you reboot it, and then all of a sudden it was a proprietary driver. Now, like every time you wanted to update, you had to like download it, run the shell script again, and reboot. Like it's always with the rebooting.
Yeah.
But at least in Arch and also Ubuntu, one of the cool things about both those distros is, and when I say Arch, it's not like raw Arch, it's like Manjaro, but it's close enough to Arch to me. And they both have like these like cool like GUI interfaces where you kind of just go drivers and then it pops up and goes, do you want to use the free or non-free? And you go non-free and select which version. And then after that, it just does all the things in the background and then prompts you to reboot. And then you reboot and you're on the proprietary driver. Now I'm interested in like, because like apparently NVIDIA is working on like their drivers becoming open source, although it sounds more like they've moved all of their logic into the firmware and into closed source blobs. But then like the driver itself can talk to the firmware and will look for those binary blobs if you're trying to access like the API that's optional.
Yeah. So like what I found interesting or fascinating is one, Red Hat Nova. I'm not sure if you've had, I mean, obviously you've ran Linux and you use NVIDIA. The Nouveau drivers were always garbage. So to have Nova come out alongside these open source instruction sets, I think that's going to like be a game changer for NVIDIA people in Linux. And it's been such a long time coming. It really has.
Yeah, I'm just more looking forward to the fact is that I won't have to do that GUI bit anymore. Like after I first install the operating system, I don't have to go and be like install the non-free drivers. I could just install it and it'll just be done. Like that's the part I'm excited about. As much as I like tinkering with my hardware, or not hardware, but like my operating system, I've also learned that I like when it just works and I don't have to do much. Like my Home Assistant box is neglected to the nth degree. I think I haven't updated it in a year.
That's okay.
It's behind a firewall, I think.
I mean, it's probably not okay. You should probably update it, but it's okay. But yeah. All right. So did you hear that, viewers? Linux. Run Linux. Run something that respects you. And now basically does everything with Vulkan and Proton. Go Vulkan, go Proton, go Valve. We shit talked you last episode, but god damn it, Proton's some of the best fucking software ever.
Yeah. Ooh, that's also another thing. If you notice that a Linux native port is running like shit, you can force compatibility to Proton and it'll play the Windows binary instead. Sometimes that makes it better.
That's so bad. Shouldn't be that way.
Sometimes it makes it better.
Well, thanks for that fucking cursed advice. All right. Let's fucking hem it in. You want to do the outro this time?
Nah, go for it.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us on another episode of the Nerds MC podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed these tangents around PC building, hardware, and all things operating systems. Again, we're always grateful for your ears and listening to us. And as always, Cody, thanks so much for being here.
Yep. I'm happy to be here. And make sure, folks, to like, comment, and subscribe. And when you're commenting, let us know what operating system have you chosen and why.